At 69 years old, you think you've seen every kind of betrayal this world has to offer. You think you're prepared. But nothing, absolutely nothing. You can prepare you for the moment you realize the child you raised is trying to bury you before you're even dead. This is the story of how they mistook my age for weakness, and how I used it as my greatest weapon. If you believe that justice has no age limit, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. At 69, you learn that the loudest sounds in the world aren't the thunderstorms that shake the windows or the combines roaring in the fields at harvest. The loudest sounds are the quiet ones. The click of a phone screen when you're trying to talk. The empty space after a question that's been answered with a lie. The sound of being utterly and completely invisible in your own home. It was a Saturday. One of those perfect Ohio afternoons in early autumn when the air is so crisp it feels like you could take a bite out of it. And the sun hangs low in the sky like a dollop of warm honey. I was out on the back deck, replacing a warped board. My old knees protested, but my hands knew the work. The familiar heft of the hammer, the scent of freshly cut pine mixing with the rich, dark smell of the soil. This was the language I understood. This farm wasn't just property, it was a library of my life. Every fence post a chapter. Every field. A memory. My son, Ethan, and his wife, Chloe, were visiting from Columbus. They were sitting at the heavy iron patio table, the one my Eleanor had picked out decades ago, sipping iced tea from her favorite blue-tinted glasses. Seeing them use those glasses sent a familiar, gentle pang through my chest. Chloe watched me for a moment. Her painted lips pulled into a tight, polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her eyes were always calculating, always assessing. "You really shouldn't be doing that yourself, Dad," she said. Her voice was smooth, coated in a layer of manufactured concern. "You could fall, or throw your back out. We could just hire someone to fix it in an hour." Hire someone. To her, everything was a transaction, a problem to be outsourced. She didn't understand that fixing this board wasn't a chore. It was a conversation with the house. It was the satisfaction of driving a nail home with two clean, perfect strikes. It was the feeling of being useful. I lined up a fresh nail. "I've been building and fixing things on this farm since before you were born. Chloe, I think I can handle one piece of wood." From across the table, Ethan grunted his agreement. Or maybe it was just a noise of acknowledgement. It was hard to tell these days. He was hunched over his phone, his thumb swiping in a lazy, hypnotic rhythm. He hadn't looked up once since they'd sat down. "She's just worried about you, Dad," he mumbled, his voice flat, his attention a million miles away and the glowing rectangle in his hand. And that was it. That was the sound, not the sound of his voice, but the vast, empty chasm that followed it. The sound of a son who couldn't be bothered to lift his head to look his own father in the eye. The quiet, effortless dismissal. I wasn't the man who taught him how to read the weather or how to drive a stick shift in this very yard. I was a background character in his life, a piece of aging infrastructure, like the deck I was fixing, a problem to be managed. I finished securing the board. The small joy of the work now tainted with something cold and inescapably bitter. That evening, they insisted on cooking dinner, their semi-annual performance of taking care of Dad. It was some kind of fancy pasta with sun-dried tomatoes and artichoke hearts, ingredients that felt alien in this old farmhouse kitchen. We sat at the big oak table, where I'd helped Ethan with his multiplication tables and listened to his stories about school. Now, the conversation was a monologue about their lives. their stressful jobs, their gossipy friends, their upcoming Christmas vacation to Cancun. I'd nod and ask a question here and there. A spectator watching a play about two strangers. Later, while I was washing the dishes by hand in the deep basin sink, they retreated to the living room. I enjoy the simple ritual of washing dishes. The warm water, the familiar weight of the plates. It gives a man time to think. Their voices drifted in, low and hushed. But the old farmhouse has walls that hold on to, sounds like they hold on to memories. We just can't keep this up. Ethan, Chloe said, her voice stripped of its earlier sweetness. Now sharp and brittle with frustration, the trips back and forth every other weekend. The gas money, the cost of maintaining this place. His pension barely covers the property taxes, as it is. I know, honey. I know, Ethan replied, his voice heavy with a weariness that had nothing to do with a hard day's work. Just give it a little more time. He's stubborn. He's got to see reason eventually. See reason, I thought, my hands submerged in the soapy water. What reason was that? We don't have time, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. With the market the way it is, we can't wait forever. Wait for what? The question hung in the air between us. Unspoken. Suffocating. I finished washing the last plate. My knuckles white as I gripped the slick porcelain. I placed it gently in the drying rack, making no sound. I didn't want them to know I'd heard. I didn't want to see the lie in their eyes when they'd inevitably pretend they were talking about the stock market or their jobs. It was easier, for a moment, to pretend I hadn't heard it at all. The sound that woke me later that night wasn't a coyote howling at the moon or the wind whistling through the eaves. It was 3 a.m, the hour of absolute stillness. When the world is holding its breath, the sound that sliced through the silence was a rhythmic, dirt-muffled thump. 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 It was the sound of a shovel biting into the earth. It was unnatural. It was wrong. I slipped out of bed, my old joints protesting in a chorus of quiet cracks. I didn't turn on a light. Decades of living here meant I could navigate this house by memory. My bare feet finding their way across the cool wooden floorboards, instinctively avoiding the one that always creaked outside the bathroom. I moved to the bedroom window, the one that overlooks the sprawling backyard and the ancient oak tree that has stood guard over this land for longer than my family has owned it. And then I saw them. The motion-activated security light had flooded the yard in a harsh, sterile glare, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like demons. 2 figures, hurried, furtive, their movements clumsy in the dark, even in that grainy, monochrome light. I knew them instantly. It was Ethan and Chloe. Ethan was holding a shovel, wielding it with the awkwardness of a man more accustomed to a keyboard. Chloe was standing beside him, holding a small, dark object, a box. They were digging a hole at the base of the old oak tree, the very spot where Eleanor and I had carved our initials inside a lopsided heart on our 5th wedding anniversary. My heart didn't just beat faster. It slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. A cold fist clenched in my gut. My breath hitched in my throat, and I had to press a hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. I watched as they placed the box in the shallow hole, their movements quick and guilty. Ethan hastily pushed the dirt back in with his shoe, then patted it down clumsily with the back of the shovel. Chloe kept glancing back towards the house, her face a pale, anxious mask. They were burying something, not hiding it, burying it, like a body, like a crime. I stayed at that window, a statue carved from shadow and disbelief. Long after they had crept back inside, the security light clicked off, plunging the yard back into darkness. But the image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in my worn leather armchair, the darkness of the room a heavy blanket, and I tried to find a single, logical reason for what I had seen. A time capsule, a sentimental treasure, but my gut, the part of a man that has kept farmers alive through droughts and floods for generations, knew better. My gut knew I had just witnessed a burial, and I was afraid I knew what had been buried. The next morning came far too slowly, the rising sun feeling like an unwelcome intruder. At breakfast, they were unnervingly cheerful. Too cheerful. They chattered about the beautiful sunrise, the crisp country air, how good it was to get away from the city noise. It was a flawless performance, and I was the unwilling, silent audience. "We've got to head back to the city a bit early." "Dad," Ethan said, his eyes focused on buttering his toast with intense concentration. "Big project at work just came up." "Of course," I said, my voice sounding distant and hollow to my own ears. "You remember to take your medication." "Okay," Chloe added, her smile as bright and brittle as a shard of ice. "We'll call you tonight to check in on you." I watched them drive away, their expensive sedan kicking up a cloud of dust on the gravel road. The moment the sound of the engine faded into the distance, I was out the door. I didn't hesitate. I walked to the shed, my movements stiff, and grabbed the old spade. The worn wooden handle felt both alien and familiar in my calloused hands. My boots left deep prints in the dewy grass as I walked the long walk to the oak tree. A death march in my own backyard. The ground was disturbed. Just as I'd seen a messy patch of darker soil, it was real. It had happened. My hands didn't shake as I began to dig. I was beyond shaking. I was in a place of cold, quiet certainty. The spade bit into the soft earth easily. A few moments later, I heard the dull thud of metal hitting metal. I knelt down, the dampness of the soil seeping through the knees of my old jeans, and my fingers clawed at the dirt until I could pull the object free. It was a small, metal lockbox. My lockbox, the one I kept tucked away in the bottom drawer of my big wooden desk for my most important documents. I didn't need a key. The latch was a simple clasp. My thumb found it, and I opened it. A cold, heavy weight settled in my chest, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. This wasn't the sharp pain of grief. This was the dull, crushing weight of trust, turning to dust. Inside, laid out like bodies in a morgue, were the papers that constituted my life. My original last will and testament, the one that left everything I owned to Ethan without condition. The deed to the farm, the one I had already legally signed over to him, but kept the original copy of for sentimental reasons. My life insurance policy, with him as the sole beneficiary, and at the very bottom, there was something else. A single, folded piece of lined paper, yellowed with age. It was a letter I had written 2 years ago. A letter addressed to my dead wife, Eleanor. It was one of those long, lonely nights when the silence of the house was too loud, and I had poured out my heart onto the page. I wrote about my growing unease, my quiet fears about Ethan and Chloe's constant, subtle questions about money. I wrote about how I felt he was slipping away from me. It was private. It was sacred. It was a conversation with a ghost. They had gone through my desk. They had invaded my privacy. They had read my most secret, vulnerable thoughts. And then, they had buried the evidence. They weren't just planning to steal my future, they were actively trying to erase my past and invalidate my present. They were laying the groundwork, brick by painstaking brick, to prove I was senile, confused, an old man who couldn't be trusted with his own memories, let alone his own assets. I fell back on the grass, the open box beside me, the letter clutched in my hand. The beautiful autumn sun felt like ice on my skin. This was never just about money. This was about my very existence. My sanity. My soul. They saw me as a ghost already haunting my own home. A loose end that needed to be tied up and put away. And in that moment, sitting by the open grave of my own life, I realized something with chilling clarity. They had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were burying a weak, forgetful old man. They didn't realize they were planting a seed in the richest, most patient soil there is the heart of a man with nothing left to lose. And they had no idea what was about to grow from it. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a declaration of war. I sat there on the damp grass, the letter to my dead wife clutched in my hand, until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. The chill of the evening seeped into my bones, but I didn't feel it. A different kind of cold had taken root deep inside me, a glacial resolve that pushed out the searing pain of betrayal. War had been declared. Yes, but the first rule of warfare is to never let your enemy know your strategy. They thought they were burying a weak, forgetful old man. It was time to give them exactly what they wanted. With movements that felt both ancient and deliberate, I placed every document back into the metal box. The will, the deed, the insurance policy, and finally, the letter to Eleanor. I closed the lid, the soft click echoing in the twilight. I placed the box back in its shallow grave and pushed the dark daskat wailard, rich soil over it with my bare hands. I patted it down, just as I had seen Ethan do, scattering a few fallen leaves over the top to make it look undisturbed. I was burying the evidence of their crime. Yes, but I was also burying the man I used to be, the loving, trusting father who saw only the best in his son. That man was a casualty of this war. In his place stood someone else. Someone colder, more patient, a strategist. The next few weeks were a master class in deception. I began my performance. I started forgetting things small at first, where I'd left my reading glasses or the name of a distant cousin. I would stop mid-sentence, a look of vacant confusion on my face, until Chloe or Ethan would impatiently fill in the blank for me. I became a ghost in my own home, shuffling from room to room. My shoulders stooped, my gaze distant, and they, in their arrogance, drank it all in. Their gaslighting campaign escalated. It was a slow, methodical poisoning of my reality. One afternoon, I came into the kitchen knowing, with the unshakable certainty of a man who has lived in the same house for 50 years, that I had left the sugar bowl on the right side of the stove. But there it was, sitting on the left. I could have sworn. I'd mumble, rubbing my temples. Chloe would glide in, wiping the counter with a cloth, and give me a pitying look. "You left it there this morning after your coffee." "Dad, don't you remember?" Her voice was a symphony of feigned patience. For a split second, a sliver of doubt would try to wedge its way into my mind. Could I have forgotten? Am I really slipping that badly? But then I'd catch the flicker of triumph in her eyes. A tiny, venomous spark, and the doubt would vanish, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of my purpose. They weren't just moving objects. They were trying to dismantle my mind, piece by piece. It was time to gather my own ammunition. The following Tuesday, I told them I needed to go into town to the hardware store for some new washers for the kitchen sink. Don't you worry, Dad. Ethan can pick those up for you on his way home from work. Chloe chirped. No, I said, my voice intentionally frail. I need the air. I like the drive. I saw them exchange a look, the look that said, let the old man have his little outing. It doesn't matter. That look was my permission slip. In town, I didn't just go to the hardware store. I went to a big box electronics store. A young clerk with slicked back hair and a bored expression asked if he could help me. Looking for a gift for the grandkids? Grandpa, he asked, already pointing me towards the brightly colored headphones. No, I said quietly. I need a digital voice recorder. I need one with a long battery life. At least 40 hours of continuous recording. I need voice activation. And a USB port for easy file transfer. And it needs to be small. Very small. The clerk's condescending smile faltered. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time, he led me to a different section and showed me a tiny, slim device. No bigger than my thumb. It was perfect. I paid in cash. My final stop was the public library, where I used a computer to create a new, anonymous email address and a secure cloud storage account. The young librarian was patient and kind as she showed me how to upload files. She thought she was helping an old man learn to save family photos. In reality, she was helping me build an arsenal. Back at the farm, I found the perfect hiding spot for the recorder. In the living room, on the mantelpiece, sat an old, ugly ceramic vase that had been a wedding gift. Eleanor had always hated it, but we kept it for sentimental reasons. It was hollow and opaque. I switched the device to voice-activated mode and carefully lowered it inside. It was invisible, but its electronic ear was now aimed directly at the sofa where they always sat. Every night, after they went to bed, I would retrieve it, transfer the day's recordings to a folder on my old desktop computer, and then upload them to the cloud before wiping the device clean for the next day. Listening to their conversations was like drinking poison. But every file, every whispered complaint about me being a burden, was another bullet in my gun. The turning point, the moment their campaign shifted from psychological to overtly hostile, happened a week later. I was coming in from the garden, my boots caked with mud. The back steps were slick with morning dew. And my foot slipped. It wasn't a bad fall. I was more startled than hurt, landing heavily on my hip, which would surely bloom into a spectacular bruise, but was otherwise fine. I was a farmer. I'd had worse falls from haylofts. I got up, dusted myself off, and went inside. I thought no one had seen me, but I was wrong. Chloe had been watching from the kitchen window. I didn't think much of it until that afternoon. When I overheard her on the phone in the hallway, her voice was a performance of pure, unadulterated panic. Dr. Miller, I'm so sorry to bother you. Yes, it's Chloe, Ansel's daughter-in-law. I'm just so worried. He had another bad fall this morning. Oh, this is the third one this month. He's getting so unsteady. And the confusion? It's getting worse. He zones out for minutes at a time. Yes, of course. I just don't know what we're going to do if he really hurts himself. I stood in the shadows of the dining room, my blood turning to ice. The third one this month. It was a bald-faced lie. a piece of fiction she had created out of thin air to build her case. She was creating a medical record for me, a false narrative of decline that would make their next move seem not like cruelty, but like a sad necessity. That was the moment I knew I needed more than just recordings. I needed a fortress. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Bill, a friend I'd known since high school. "Bill, it's Ansel," I said. "I need to come see you. It's about updating my will." "Ansel, good to hear from you. You old goat. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine." I lied. "Just getting my affairs in order." At his office, I didn't have to pretend. I told him everything. The box, the gaslighting, the phone call to my doctor. Bill listened, his jovial face growing harder and more serious with every word. We spent the next 3 hours laying the groundwork for my counterattack. We drew up a new will, one that left the farm and all my assets to a charitable foundation I'd just created, the Eleanor House, a trust dedicated to providing safe housing for elderly individuals facing family abuse. I left Ethan exactly $1. As Bill explained, leaving him a nominal amount meant he couldn't legally contest the will by claiming he was forgotten. Then, we established a limited liability company, an LLC, with me as the sole member. It was the first step in making my assets invisible. On the drive home, my mind was buzzing. I had a plan, but I needed a safe place to execute it from, a base of operations. And then, like a gift from the past, I remembered my sister, Eleanor's other legacy, my younger sister, who had passed away 2 years prior, had been a shrewd investor. She had never married, never had kids, and had left her entire estate to me. Most of it was in stocks, which I had already dealt with, but she had also left me her condo in Columbus, a nice, quiet place downtown that I had never visited. I still had the key and a box of her old things. She'd given it to me a year before she died. "Just in case. Ansel," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "Just in case you ever need a place to disappear to." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now, her words felt like a prophecy. That night, I captured the golden recording. They thought I had gone to bed early, complaining of a sore hip from my fall. I was in my room, but the little recorder in the ceramic vase was listening. They were talking about the doctor's call. "Dr. Miller is completely on board," Chloe said, her voice smug. "He's making a note in Dad's file about a cognitive assessment. This is working." "Ethan." There was a pause. Then, Ethan's voice, low and chillingly practical. "It's not working fast enough. What if he has an accident before we can get him into a home? A real one. He could break a hip. He could be laid up here for months. We'd be stuck." "So what are you suggesting?" Chloe asked. "I'm just saying, at his age, living alone on a big farm, accidents happen all the time." Ethan said. The subtext was as thick and suffocating as mud. "The stairs are steep. The wiring in the barn is old. It would be a tragedy, but it would solve the problem." Listening to the recording later, alone in the dead of night with my headphones on, I felt the last vestiges of love for the boy I had raised wither and die. He was discussing my death as if it were a logistical inconvenience. A few days later, I made my secret trip to Columbus. I told them I was driving up to Toledo to visit an old army buddy for a couple of days. They were delighted to have me out of the house. Finding Eleanor's condo building was easy. Stepping inside was like stepping into a sanctuary. It was clean, filled with light, and completely anonymous. I spent the day turning on the utilities, buying a cheap laptop and a new prepaid cell phone, and stocking the fridge. It was my fortress. When I got back to the farm, my next-door neighbor, a kind widow named Mrs. Henderson, stopped me by the mailbox. "Ansel, dear, I'm glad to see you," she said, her face etched with genuine concern. I was getting worried. "I saw your son's wife the other day at the market, and she said you've been having some bad spells." I saw Chloe's web, sticky and intricate, extending out into the community. She was poisoning the well, turning my friends and neighbors into unwitting witnesses for her narrative. I gave Mrs. Henderson a tired, sad smile. "Just getting older. Martha, you know how it is." The final move came that Friday. They arrived not with groceries, but with a glossy, expensive-looking leather folder. They sat me down at the kitchen table, their faces a mask of solemn concern. "Dad," Ethan began, his voice oozing a sincerity that made my skin crawl. "Chloe and I have been talking, and we've found a wonderful place for you." He opened the folder. It was a brochure for a place called Golden Meadows Senior Living. Pictures of smiling, silver-haired residents playing bingo and doing water aerobics stared up at me. It looked like a luxury prison. "This is the best thing for you, Dad. For your safety," Chloe said, pushing a stack of papers and a pen across the table. "We just need you to sign these admission forms." I looked at the papers. I looked at their eager, predatory faces. They thought they had me. They thought the old man was finally cornered. Checked. And mated. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the pen. I looked up at them, allowing my eyes to fill with tears of defeat. "Okay," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You're right. It's too much for me now." I let out a long, shuddering sigh. "Just let me have one last night in my own bed. Let me sleep on it. In the morning, I'll sign them in the morning." The look of triumphant relief that washed over their faces was blinding. They had won. They exchanged a victorious glance over my bowed head, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to break. They thought they were giving me one last night. They had no idea I was taking it. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "In the morning. I'll sign them in the morning." The look of triumphant relief that washed over their faces was blinding, a sickeningly bright dawn on their greedy faces. They had won. They exchanged a victorious glance over my bowed head. A silent, smug communication that screamed their contempt for the broken old man they thought they were looking at. They believed they were granting me one last night of dignity. They had no idea I was taking it as my first act of war. They went to bed early that night, no doubt eager for the morning to arrive when my signature would turn their cruel ambitions into reality. I heard their footsteps on the old staircase, the quiet murmur of their voices, the click of their bedroom door shutting, and then silence, a profound, heavy silence that felt different from the usual peace of the farmhouse. This was the silence of a battlefield after the generals have left the tent, the silence where plans are put into motion. I did not move for a full hour. I sat at the kitchen table, a statue of defeat. In case one of them came down for a glass of water, I listened to the house, the groan of the pipes, the whisper of the wind against the windows, the slow, steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, the heartbeat of my home. It was a rhythm I had known my entire life. And tonight, I was listening to it for the last time. When I was certain they were asleep, I rose from my chair. There was no longer a tremor in my hands. The stoop in my shoulders was gone. Every movement was precise, economical, and silent. This was no longer my home. It was an enemy prison. And I was escaping. First, I went to my study. I didn't turn on the main light. Using only the small desk lamp that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. From the bottom of my closet, I pulled out a sturdy canvas duffel bag I used to use for hunting trips. My go bag. The contents were not chosen at random. Each item was a tool for the task ahead. The new laptop and its charger went in first. Then, the thumb-sized digital recorder. My most crucial piece of evidence. I added a manila envelope containing the certified copies of the new will and the LLC formation documents that my lawyer, Bill, had couriered to a P.O. box I'd set up in town. Then came the personal items. I took only two. The first was a small, framed photograph of my Eleanor, taken on our honeymoon. Her smile was genuine, full of a light that Chloe's could never mimic. She would be my moral compass, a reminder of what I was truly fighting for, not just for myself, but for the honor of the life we had built together. The last thing I packed was the old Zippo lighter my father had carried in the war. I didn't smoke, but the solid, metallic weight of it in my hand was a comfort, a tangible link to a man of quiet, unshakable strength. I was going to need that strength. I zipped the bag shut, leaving a lifetime of possessions behind without a second glance. They were just things. They couldn't hurt me anymore. My next stop was the old desktop computer in the corner. It hummed to life, its familiar chime sounding unnaturally loud in the silent house. My fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. I cleared the browser history, deleting the records of my trips to the library's website, the electronics store, the bank. I found the folder where I had stored the audio files from the recorder and permanently deleted it, then ran a program to wipe the free space, making the files unrecoverable. I was erasing the ghost of the man who had been gathering evidence. From this moment on, that man and his plans existed only in the cloud and in my own mind. My final act in the house was the most important. I took a small notepad and a pen from the kitchen drawer. For a moment, I practiced my new signature, the shaky, frail scrawl of a man losing his grip. Then, with that same deliberate tremor, I wrote a single sentence on a fresh sheet of paper. I know what you buried in the backyard. I tore the sheet from the pad and placed it squarely in the center of the kitchen table, right on top of the glossy brochure for Golden Meadows. I set the pen down next to it, as if I had been interrupted mid-thought. It was the first shot fired, a quiet, devastating cannonball aimed directly at the heart of their arrogance. Then, I allowed myself one last look. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, letting my eyes drift over the silent, moonlit shapes. The armchair where I had read hundreds of bedtime stories to a small, dark-haired boy. The faint pencil marks on the doorframe, tracking Ethan's height from a toddler to a young man who towered over me. The worn spot on the rug where Eleanor's feet had always rested. This house wasn't made of wood and nails. It was made of memories. And they had tainted every single one. A wave of profound, sorrowful grief washed over me. So powerful, it almost buckled my knees. It was the grief for the son I thought I had, for the family I believed was mine. But the grief did not break me. It settled back into that cold, hard place in my gut and became fuel. I slipped out the back door, closing it so gently it didn't even click. The night air was cool and smelled of damp earth. I walked to my old pickup truck, my faithful companion for over 20 years. The engine turned over with a low, familiar rumble. I didn't turn on the headlights until I was at the end of the long gravel driveway, leaving the house, and my son, in the darkness behind me. I drove not towards the highway, but towards a small, long-term parking lot in the next town over. The kind used by truckers and long-haul travelers. I found a spot in a dimly lit corner, pulled the keys from the ignition, and gave the dashboard a final, affectionate pat. Leaving the truck behind felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. With my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I walked to the all-night diner a block away, where I had arranged for a local taxi to meet me at 2:00 a.m. sharp. The taxi was already there, its engine idling quietly. The driver, a young man who looked half asleep. I didn't say a word as I gave him the address for the bus station in Columbus. The 2-hour drive was a journey through a strange, transitional world. The familiar farm country blurred into dark, anonymous suburbs, and finally, into the sleeping city. As we neared the station, a police car pulled up behind us, its headlights filling the taxi's interior with a sudden, harsh light. My heart leaped into my throat. My hands, which had been steady all night, tightened their grip on the duffel bag in my lap. I stared straight ahead, my face a carefully composed mask of weary travel. He knows, I thought, a jolt of panic searing through me. Someone saw me. They reported the truck. It's over. The police car followed us for 2 agonizingly long blocks. To me, it felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, its turn signal blinked, and it peeled off. Turning down a side street, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, the tension draining out of me in a dizzying rush. The bus station was mostly empty, populated by a few lost souls and the weary overnight cleaning crew. I bought a ticket for a bus I had no intention of taking, just for show. Then, I found a quiet corner, and using the new prepaid phone, I called for a rideshare to take me the final few miles to Eleanor's condo. The moment I stepped inside the apartment and shut the door behind me, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I was safe. I was a ghost. I dropped the duffel bag and walked to the large picture window. 15 floors below, the city was a tapestry of glittering lights and dark, empty streets. It was a new, alien world, my battlefield. Back at the farm, the sun was just beginning to rise. Chloe was the first one up, humming a cheerful little tune as she came down the stairs. Already tasting the victory, she walked into the kitchen to start the coffee. And then she saw it, the single sheet of paper on the table. She stopped humming, her brow furrowed in confusion. She picked it up. Her scream was sharp and ragged, tearing through the morning peace of the farmhouse. Ethan came thundering down the stairs, his face a mask of alarm. "What is it? What's wrong?" Chloe could only point, her hand shaking, her face as white as a sheet. Ethan snatched the note from her. He read the words, his eyes widening in horror. He ran to my bedroom door and threw it open, revealing the empty, perfectly made bed. He checked the whole house. He ran outside. My truck was gone. They stood in the kitchen in a state of pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. The hunter had become the hunted. The trap they had so carefully set had snapped shut, but they were the ones caught inside it. I, however, did not rest. Adrenaline was a luxury I couldn't afford. I took a quick, hot shower, washing away the grime of the farm and the residue of my old life. Then, I got to work. I unpacked the new laptop and connected to the secure Wi-Fi network I had set up on my previous visit. Me fingers, usually stiff from farm work, moved deftly across the keyboard. I created a new social media profile on Facebook. For the name, I chose The Overlooked Farmer. For the profile picture, I used a photo of a weathered, empty barn standing alone in a vast field at sunset. Then, I navigated to the public community page for my hometown, a page usually filled with announcements about bake sales and lost dogs. I took a deep, steadying breath, and I crafted a single, simple post. My name is Ansel Matthews. Many of you have known me my whole life. You think you know my story. You are wrong. The truth about what has been happening at the Matthews farm will be revealed tonight at 8:00 p.m. sharp. You are all invited to watch. Beneath the text, I posted the link to a live streaming service. I hit the post button. The invitation was sent. The trap was set. The rest of the day was a long piece. Slow countdown. I watched as the post began to gather reactions. A like here. A confused emoji there. Then, the comments started. Ansel, are you okay? What is this about? Is this a joke? It spread like wildfire. By late afternoon, it had hundreds of shares. At 7:59 p.m., I was sitting in front of the laptop in a simple chair. The webcam was on. I could see my own face on the screen, the face of a tired, old man. But my eyes were clear and steady. The live stream page was open. A small counter in the corner of the screen showed how many people were waiting for the stream to begin. 10, 50, 200, 500. The number was climbing. Faster and faster. They were all here. My neighbors, my friends, and somewhere in that panicked house miles away, my son and his wife. I took one final, steadying breath. I moved the cursor until it hovered over the bright red button that said, Go live. My whole life had led to this single, quiet click. My whole life had led to this single, quiet click. My finger, steady and sure, pressed down on the mouse. The red button on the screen changed to a banner that read, Live. A small, blinking light on the webcam turned green. I was on. For a moment, I just looked into the small, dark lens, imagining the hundreds, maybe thousands of faces looking back. I saw my neighbors. I saw the congregation from my church. I saw the good people of my town. And I saw them. I knew they were watching. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm and even. The voice of a man about to tell a simple, unadorned truth. Good evening. I began. My name is Ansel Matthews, and I see a lot of familiar names in the comments tonight. Thank you for being here. I am speaking to you tonight from a safe, undisclosed location in Columbus. But as most of you know, my home, my life, is on a farm just outside of town. The farm my father worked, and his father before him. The farm I raised my son on. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. I did not need to rush. I had all the time in the world now. I am a father. That has been the single greatest honor of my life. When my wife Eleanor passed, our son, Ethan, was my whole world. I gave him everything. I taught him everything I knew about the land, about being a good man. When he turned 18, I gave him the deed to the farm. The legacy of our entire family. When he married Chloe, I welcomed her as a daughter. I thought we were a family, bound by love and trust. I was wrong. I was so very, very wrong. From there, I told them the entire story. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply laid the facts out, piece by painful piece, like stones in a foundation. I told them about their constant, subtle questions about money. I told them about their whispers of me being a burden. I told them about the night I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of a shovel, and what I saw from my bedroom window. As I described them burying the lockbox under the old oak tree, I could see the live chat on the side of my screen explode into a frenzy of question marks and shocked emojis. They thought I was asleep. I continued, my voice unwavering. They thought I was oblivious. The next day, after they left, I dug up that box, and I found they had stolen my will, my insurance policy, and a private letter I had written to my late wife. They were stealing my life, piece by piece, and burying it in my own backyard. Then, I moved on to the next phase. I told them about the gaslighting, the moved objects, the constant chipping away at my confidence and my sanity, and I told them about my fall on the back steps. It was a minor slip, a stumble, but what I want you to hear now is how my daughter-in-law, Chloe, described that slip to my doctor. I reached over and clicked a file on my laptop. A digital audio player appeared on the screen. I hit play. Chloe's voice, syrupy, sweet, and full of fake panic, filled the silence. The entire, uncut recording of her lying to Dr. Pywell. Miller played out for the world to hear. Another bad fall this morning. The third one this month. The confusion. It's getting worse. The live chat turned from confused to furious. Liar. One comment read, "That is pure evil," said another. I let the recording finish. That was the moment. I said, my voice now hard as iron, that I knew this was not just about greed. This was about erasing me, but the worst was yet to come. I looked directly into the camera lens, my gaze piercing through the screen. 2 weeks ago, they sat me down and told me that accidents can happen to old men who live alone. They talked about the steep stairs and the old wiring in the barn. They talked about how a tragedy could solve the problem. They didn't know I was recording that conversation either. And then I played it. The golden recording. The entire, chilling, 10-minute conversation. The world heard Ethan's cold, practical voice suggesting an accident would be a convenient solution. The silence in the live chat was absolute. A digital stunded silence. Then, it was a tidal wave of pure blank, unadulterated rage. People weren't just typing words anymore. They were typing in all caps, demanding justice. From their living room at the farm, Ethan and Chloe watched, their faces draining of all color. Chloe was the first to break, her hand flying to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips. "Turn it off. Ethan, turn it off now," she shrieked. Ethan was frozen, his eyes wide with a horror that was slowly being replaced by a feral panic. I can't. It's live. It's everywhere. His phone started buzzing on the coffee table. Then Chloe's. They were a frantic, vibrating chorus of incoming notifications and calls from friends and family who were all watching, in real time, as their carefully constructed world was being systematically dismantled. I wasn't finished. They did all this. I said to my silent, global audience. Because they wanted my assets, they wanted the farm, they wanted my savings. Last night, they presented me with papers to sign myself into a nursing home, which would have given them full control. They thought that this morning, they would have everything. I held up a document to the camera. This is a copy of my new, legally notarized last will and testament, filed last week. It leaves my entire estate to a foundation I have established to help elderly people who are victims of family abuse. My son, Ethan, is left the sum of $1. I held up a second document. And this? This is the formation document for an LLC I also created last week. You see, a few days ago, I liquidated half of my liquid assets and transferred them to a new business account under the name of that company. The money they were trying to steal was already gone. That was the final blow. In the farmhouse, the panic erupted into ugly, accusatory rage. You, Chloe, screamed at Ethan. Her face twisted and ugly. This is your fault, you and your stupid, clumsy plan. My plan, Ethan roared back, his face red with fury and shame. You were the one pushing me every step of the way. Their fight was interrupted by a sound from outside. A sirene. Then another. The flashing red and blue lights painted the living room walls in strobing, frantic colors. A loud, authoritative knock rattled the front door. County Sheriff, open the door. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The live stream video went viral overnight. By morning, it was on the national news. Ethan and Chloe's arrest was filmed by a local news crew, the perp walk from my front porch. Their faces pale and stunned, was broadcast for the world to see. They were fired from their jobs by noon. Their friends abandoned them. Their digital footprint was a wasteland of angry comments and public condemnation. The trial, 3 months later, was a formality. My recordings were ironclad evidence. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Ethan was found guilty of elder abuse, making criminal threats, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Chloe received 3 years for her part in the conspiracy. They were also ordered to pay me $200, nil in damages. A few months after he was incarcerated, I received a letter from Ethan. It was filled with pages of self-pity, apologies that rang hollow, and pleas for me to find it in my heart to forgive him. He wrote that he had nightmares about what he had done. I read the entire letter. My heart a calm, still lake. I took a single sheet of paper, wrote 1 sentence on it, and mailed it back to the prison. It read, "Monsters don't deserve forgiveness." I never heard from him again. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding, not just for me, but for the farm itself. I used the money from the damages, along with the funds I had secured in my LLC, not to retire, but to give the farm a new purpose. I sold Eleanor's condo in the city and poured every last dime into my foundation. The farmhouse, a place that had become tainted with such painful memories, was renovated. I added new wings, made everything accessible, and hired a small, compassionate staff. I renamed it the Eleanor House, in honor of my sister whose love and foresight had given me a sanctuary when I needed it most. It became a home, a safe haven, for elderly men and women who had nowhere else to go. People who had been abused, neglected, or cast aside by their own families. Today, I am 70 years old. I don't live in the main farmhouse anymore. I have a small, comfortable apartment above the renovated barn. My mornings are no longer silent. They are filled with the sounds of laughter from the community garden, the clinking of coffee cups on the communal porch, the murmur of stories being shared between people who understand. I'm sitting on that porch now, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching a group of residents play cards at a nearby table. They are from all walks of life: a retired teacher, a former mechanic, a woman who used to be a librarian. Here, they are not burdens, they are survivors. They are respected. We are a family. A real one, forged not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual respect. Ethan thought my age was my greatest weakness. He thought my quiet life meant I was powerless. He was wrong. My age gave me patience. My experience gave me perspective, and his cruelty gave me a purpose. He tried to bury me, but he forgot that I am a farmer. He forgot that I know, better than anyone, how to plant a seed in the dark, cold earth, and wait for it to grow into something strong and unshakable. And in the end, I harvested the most satisfying crop of all: justice.